Welcome to Golden Mummies of Egypt. My name is Rocheleau, and I am the curator of ancient art at the museum, which means that I take care of all the ancient collections, all the archaeological collections, including those from ancient Egypt. In the Golden Mummies exhibition, we have something that we do not have in our own collection. That is, we have mummies, 8 mummies for visitors to take a look at when they're coming to see this exhibition. And we're looking at mummies from a very specific time period in Egyptian history, at the very, very end, when the Greeks and the Romans ruled Egypt. So we're talking about a time span of about 600 years old. And at the very beginning, when the Greeks started ruling in Egypt, they maintained the tradition of mummification and preparation of the body and making coffins. And that looks very, very much like what you see in pharaonic Egypt. That coffin that you see behind me with the mummy inside is one that dates to those earlier periods. So we're talking about 300 years, 300 BC. So at the beginning of the Greek period. And what you notice is that there is a coffin and the mummy goes inside. And the mummy is really the body of a person who died in ancient Egypt about 2,000 years ago. And their body was carefully prepared and mummified to be preserved for the afterlife. It was very important for the ancient Egyptians to preserve the body so that the soul of the person could live in the afterlife. And that is why the mummy was placed also in the coffin. That added an extra layer of protection. Now, what the Egyptians also wanted to do, they made sure that they had all plans covered, that they put amulets to help the person reach the afterlife, be reborn in the afterlife. So they put a lot of decorations, religious motifs and symbols on the coffins themselves, and a little bit also on or inside the mummy wrappings. And this is what you see on the mummy of Ta Sheri Ankh behind me. So those motifs might include a winged goddess, Nut, for example, might include the god Anubis, who is the god of embalming, the god of mummification. But you also have things like a little bit of gold, and you might see that the coffin is decorated with blue hair because they're trying to look as close as possible to a god. And in ancient Egypt, a god is said to have skin of gold and hair of lapis lazuli, which is a blue semi-precious stone. So if you look like a god, you're more likely to be reborn in the afterlife because gods are said to be eternal, they never die. So it's another way to help a person get to the afterlife and have their body preserved for all eternity. Now, if you zoom in onto the mummy of Ta Sheri Ankh, especially near her head, you will see that she's wearing an extra layer of protection. We call this a mummy mask because it really goes over the head of the mummy. And it's a very important part of the protection of the body because the Egyptians wanted to make sure that nothing happened to the head so that in the afterlife, the person would be able to breathe, to see, to hear, to speak, and to eat. And all of this is really centered around the head. So it's very important for that part of the body to be preserved as well. And it also identifies this mummy as the mummy of a human, as opposed to the mummy of an animal, which the Egyptians also mummified. So if we look at the other end of that historical period when the Romans are ruling Egypt, you'll notice that things have changed a little bit. That yes, they're still practicing mummification. The Egyptians are still making mummies, but on the outside, the mummies look a little bit different. And there is a very evident, very obvious Roman influence there. One of the things you notice is that the head of the mummy is not covered by one of those helmet masks. Instead, it has a portrait that is placed in front of the mummy's face and attached to the wrappings. When you look at the wrappings also, you notice that they're in a pattern, this sort of diamond-shaped pattern, and they very often have little gold studs in them. So it's very different from what you have before. And you also have a foot case, which is really where you put the feet of the mummy, almost like a mask for the feet. And you'll see very often they're wearing nice little flip-flops, nice little shoes. But on the other side, underside, you will see a representation, just very generic and general representation of enemies, so that when the mummy is propped up at a funeral, for example, they're stepping on their enemies. They're stepping on death, for example, as the enemy, because they will be reborn in the afterlife. So if you look at the portrait of this young man, you will see he's very realistically represented. But there's still a little bit of gold on there. If you look carefully, he's wearing a gold wreath. And there's also a line of gold painted across his lips. So the gold is very important still at this time period because of the association with the skin of the gods, but also gold as a metal, which is a metal that does not tarnish. So you see that use there, even though if it's just a little bit goes a long way in this case. And you can imagine that between the first mummy that we saw and this one, there's all sorts of others, this evolution, if you will, of this tradition during this long period of 600 years. So that's what you see in the exhibition, Golden Mummies of Egypt.